The receptionist almost dismissed him with a single glance. A man in faded clothes, tired eyes, and worn-out shoes, standing quietly in a building where confidence usually walked in expensive suits. But when his application reached the top floor, everything changed. Because the moment the billionaire CEO saw his name, his hands froze midair. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe in kindness and second chances, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness 2.0. The morning sun was bright, almost unforgiving, as it poured across the glass walls of Orion Crest Holdings. The building stood tall and flawless, reflecting success in every polished surface. People moved in and out with purpose, their footsteps fast, their expressions sharp, as if time itself belonged to them. In the middle of all that motion, Armin Halim stood still for a moment outside the entrance, clutching a simple folded paper in his hand. It wasn't much, just a job application for a janitor position, but to him, it carried the weight of survival. Armin wasn't always this man. There was a time when his mornings began with laughter instead of silence, when his home felt warm, full, alive. But life had a way of shifting without warning. The day his wife passed away, everything changed. It wasn't just grief, it was responsibility crashing down all at once. Their daughter, Meher, was too young to understand loss, but old enough to feel absence. And from that day forward, Armin became everything: father, mother, provider, protector. He tried to hold things together. At first, he managed. He worked longer hours, took smaller jobs, adjusted to a life that demanded more from him than he thought possible. But slowly, the cracks began to show. His previous job slipped away during a company downsizing. The savings they had vanished faster than he expected. Rent notices started piling up. And every night, as he watched his daughter sleep peacefully, he felt the quiet pressure of a future he couldn't fully secure. Still, he never let Meher see that fear. To her, he remained strong. He smiled when he didn't feel like smiling. He reassured her when he himself felt uncertain. Because sometimes, love forces you to become stronger than your circumstances. That morning, before leaving the house, he looked at her one last time. She was sitting on the floor, drawing something colorful with broken crayons. She looked up at him and smiled. A simple, innocent smile that carried more hope than anything else in his life. That smile stayed with him as he stepped out into the harsh daylight, determined to find something, anything, that would keep them going. The idea of applying as a janitor didn't come from ambition. It came from necessity. Armin had once been skilled, respected in his field, someone who worked with precision and pride. But life had stripped away the luxury of choosing. Now, he wasn't looking for status. He was looking for stability. A chance. A way to keep food on the table and medicine in the cabinet. As he walked into Orion Crest Holdings, he felt the weight of every eye that briefly glanced his way. He didn't belong here, not in appearance, not in presence. But he pushed that feeling aside. Because when survival calls, pride learns to stay silent. He approached the reception desk calmly, asking for an application form. The woman behind the desk handed it to him without much interest, her attention already shifting back to her screen. To her, he was just another applicant. Another story that would probably go unnoticed. But Armin treated that form like it mattered. He sat down in a quiet corner, carefully filling in every detail. His handwriting was steady, though his hands carried the marks of hard work and struggle. Each word reflected a life that had seen both stability and loss. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't hide. He simply wrote the truth. Because that's all he had left. When he finished, he folded the paper neatly and returned it to the desk. There was no guarantee, no promise, just a quiet hope that maybe, this time, things would be different. Hours passed. Armin sat in the waiting area, watching people come and go. Some walked in confident, others walked out relieved or disappointed. Time moved slowly, stretching each minute into something heavier. But he didn't leave. He couldn't afford to. Because walking away meant going back empty-handed. And that wasn't an option. Upstairs, far removed from the waiting area, Zayden Cross sat in his office, surrounded by success. The room was large, elegant, filled with natural light pouring through the glass walls. Everything about it reflected power, control, precision, achievement. But Zayden himself sat quietly, reviewing documents one after another, his mind focused yet distant. He had built everything from nothing. At least, That's what the world believed. But the truth was more complicated. Because long before the success, long before the recognition, there was a time when Zayden had nothing. No stability, no direction, just a life struggling to find purpose. And in that time, there had been someone who had helped him without expecting anything in return. A name he hadn't thought about in years. Until now. Among the stack of applications placed on his desk, one paper slipped slightly out of alignment. It was simple, plain, nothing remarkable about it, except the name written at the top. Armin Halim. Zayden's eyes stopped. His fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the paper. The room suddenly felt quieter, heavier. The sunlight still filled the space, but it no longer felt warm. Because that name carried memories. Memories he had buried under years of success. Memories of a time when he wasn't the man he is today. He read it again. Armin Halim. It couldn't be a coincidence. But part of him hoped it was. Because if it wasn't, then it meant something he wasn't ready to face. His mind drifted back, pulling him into moments he hadn't revisited in a long time. Days of struggle, nights of uncertainty, and one man who had stood beside him when no one else did. A man who had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. And now, that same man was applying for a janitor job in his company. Zayden leaned back slowly, his gaze fixed on the paper as emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel began to rise. Guilt, surprise, disbelief. How had life brought them to this point? How had their paths separated so completely? And more importantly, what was he supposed to do now? Downstairs, unaware of the storm his name had created, Armin sat quietly, his eyes occasionally lifting toward the reception desk. He didn't know that his past had just walked into his present. He didn't know that the man reviewing his application wasn't just a CEO. He was someone whose life had once been shaped by Armin's kindness. And now, fate had brought them back together in the most unexpected way. Minutes turned into an hour. And then, the receptionist looked up. Her expression changed slightly as she called his name. Armin stood up immediately, his heart beating a little faster. This was it. Whatever happened next would decide more than just a job. It would decide the direction of his life. He followed the instructions given to him, walking toward the elevator that would take him to the top floor. Each step felt heavier. Each second stretched longer. Because deep down, he felt something was different. But he didn't know why. As the elevator doors closed, carrying him upward, the sunlight reflected across the glass walls of the building. Bright, steady, almost symbolic. A new moment was waiting. A truth was about to unfold. And a past long forgotten was about to change everything. Cliffhanger backhand index pointing right. Why did billionaire CEO Zayden Cross freeze after seeing the name Armin Halim? And what secret from their past is about to change both their lives forever? The elevator doors opened with a soft sound, but for Armin Halim, it felt like stepping into another world. The bright daylight flooded the top floor, reflecting off polished marble floors and glass walls that stretched toward the sky. Everything felt distant, almost unreal, as if he had crossed into a place meant for people far different from him. His steps were slow, careful, carrying both hope and hesitation. He had come here for a janitor's job, nothing more. But the strange tension in the air made his heart beat faster, as if something bigger was waiting beyond that final door. Inside the office, Zayden Cross stood still, his back turned toward the entrance, his gaze fixed on the city below. The sunlight wrapped around him, casting long shadows across the room. But his mind was far away, lost somewhere between the present and a past he had spent years avoiding. The name still echoed in his thoughts like a memory refusing to fade. Armin Halim. A name tied to a chapter of his life when he had nothing, when survival depended on the kindness of others. He heard the door open behind him. For a moment, he didn't turn, because sometimes facing the truth feels heavier than carrying it. But slowly he did. And there he was, standing at the entrance. Not as the man Zayden remembered, but as someone life had tested, reshaped, and pushed to the edge. Armin looked older, worn by time and struggle, yet there was something unchanged in his eyes. A quiet strength. A dignity that hadn't broken, no matter how hard life had tried. Time stopped between them. Two men, two journeys, connected by a past neither of them could deny. Armin didn't recognize him at first. Why would he? The man standing before him now was dressed in power, surrounded by success. The difference between their lives was too vast, too unreal. But Zayden saw everything clearly, every memory, every moment that had once defined him. Years ago, when Zayden had been nothing but a struggling young man, it was Armin who had given him a chance. A small opportunity. A place to work when no one else believed in him. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't something the world would notice. But for Zayden, it was everything. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness becomes the foundation of someone's future. And yet, he had walked away from that past. As success grew, as his name rose, as his world changed, he left behind the people who had once stood beside him. Not out of cruelty, but out of distance. Out of forgetting. Out of becoming someone new. Until now, Armin stood there, unaware of the storm inside Zayden's mind. He lowered his gaze slightly, waiting, respectful, uncertain. To him, this was just another moment of judgment. Another decision that could either open a door or close it forever. But this wasn't just any decision. This was something deeper. Zayden walked forward slowly, each step carrying years of unspoken truth. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something heavier, something real. He wasn't looking at a janitor applicant. He was looking at the man who once helped him survive. Armin finally looked up properly, his eyes meeting Zayden's. And in that moment, something shifted. Recognition didn't come instantly, but a faint sense of familiarity touched his thoughts, like a memory trying to return after being lost for too long. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything they hadn't said and everything they were about to face. Zayden didn't treat him like an applicant. He treated him like someone who mattered. Because for the first time in years, he understood something clearly. Success had given him everything, except the chance to repay what he once owed. And now, life had brought that chance back. Armin's story unfolded in that room, not through dramatic words, but through quiet truth. The loss of his wife, the responsibility of raising his daughter alone, the struggle to hold on to dignity while everything else slipped away. He didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't demand respect. He simply stood there as a man trying to survive. And that honesty hit harder than anything else. Zayden felt the weight of it all. Not just Armin's struggle, but his own past. The version of himself he had left behind. For a moment, the powerful CEO disappeared, and the man he once was returned. The decision was no longer about a job. It was about justice. About gratitude. About doing what should have been done long ago. Days later, under the same bright daylight that once witnessed Armin's struggle, everything began to change. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a steady, meaningful one. Armin didn't just receive a job. He received stability, respect, a position that valued his experience, his honesty, and his strength. But more importantly, he received recognition, not as a worker, but as a human being who had given without expecting anything back. His life slowly found balance again. His daughter's smile returned, brighter than ever. The small home that once carried silence began to feel warm again. And for the first time in a long time, Armin felt something he had almost forgotten. Peace. Zayden, on the other hand, changed in a different way. Success no longer felt complete on its own. Because he realized something simple, yet powerful. No one rises alone. Every success story carries invisible names behind it. People who helped, supported, believed, and were forgotten along the way. Armin Halim was one of those names. And now, he would never be forgotten again. Backhand index pointing right before we end. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever helped someone without expecting anything in return, or been helped when you needed it the most? That question mattered. Because stories like this aren't just stories. They are reflections of real life. Moments where kindness quietly shapes destinies. Moments where the smallest act creates the biggest impact. And moments where life gives you a second chance to do what's right. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness 2.0. Because sometimes, the person you help today becomes the reason your tomorrow changes forever. Red Heart.